Today's video is about the pros and cons of a fixed lens camera. That doesn't sound right. The camera that I use for my professional work and have used for the past year is a Sony RX10 Mark II. You might not have heard about it because it's sort of this weird in the middle of nowhere kind of camera according to most reviews and to most people, because it's not quite a DSLR or a professional camera because it only has a fixed lens. You can't even change the lens. And then on the other side, as a vlogging camera or as a smaller camera, it's kind of just too big to be that. So it sort of just falls in the middle for most people. A really useful feature of the camera for me is that it has a 24 to 200mm equivalent lens at a constant aperture. So that means whether you zoom in or zoom out, essentially the same amount of light can get into the lens. And that's really handy for me because a lot of the time when I'm filming a subject, I like to try and shoot a wide shot of the same thing as well as a tight shot, and sometimes even a medium. And the reason for that I'll explain another time. This camera has an electronic viewfinder, which I don't care how bright or not bright or good or bad it is. An electronic viewfinder versus no electronic viewfinder is absolutely sensational. I also really love the slow motion I can get out of this camera. I can shoot 100 frames per second with audio in 1080p, and I can also get a burst of 2 seconds of 250 frames per second at just below full HD. And for professional purposes that actually holds up. I wouldn't say that I'm a color grading guru because most of the work that I've done has required me to deliver products really quickly after they've been shot, and so that means I just don't have that much time to color grade. But having S-Log in this camera really helps, and it's helping me push myself to learn how to color grade better. There are also other benefits to this camera, but the last one that I'm going to mention is an internal ND filter. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm flicking the ND filter on and off, and that allows me to control the light that enters the camera and get the correct shutter speed that I need. On the cons side of things, the first one is low light. This camera is no good in low light. I know that Sony has become synonymous with being able to perform really well in low light, but not this camera. Because of its small sensor, I do not put the ISO higher than 800 if possible, and at already 1250 it kind of looks like it's snowing outside. The next con is just as a result of the fact that I bought the camera in the USA, and that means that when I shoot on PAL, which is 25 frames a second or 50 frames a second, whatever it may be, it means that every time I turn the camera on, it says running on PAL, and I have to press any button on the camera to get that message away, and then I can start shooting. So it slows me down probably by about 5 or 8 seconds every single time I turn the camera on. The last limitation of this camera for me is that it's really hard to get shallow depth of field. You have to really work for it. That is because the sensor is small, and even though it is a constant aperture of f2.8, f2.8 on a small sensor, on this sensor is probably the equivalent of like f5.6 or 7.1 on a Canon full frame DSLR. So you really have to work for the depth of field. In summary, I think this is a great camera. I've used it now exclusively for a year on basically all of my professional work, and I don't even think it's aimed at a professional market at all. So I'm very glad about the results that I've got. I'm most likely going to be upgrading at some point, but this camera's worked well for me. Check out the beach I'm walking to.